welcome to the exciting world of Aeon Trespass Odyssey, the epic 1 to 4 player cooperative board game from Into the Unknown. In this game, players will explore and battle their way across a fantastical reimagining of ancient Greece in a struggle to save humanity from a terrifying invasion of primordials, gargantuan creatures from the unknown. If you're new to Aeon Trespass Odyssey, then the sheer size and scope of the game and the length of the rulebook can be intimidating. The purpose of this video is to make that rulebook a little less scary and to provide newcomers with a gentle introduction to some of the game's core concepts. If you're about to begin your first campaign, then this video is for you. Conversely, if you're already a seasoned Argonaut with primordial blood on your hands, then this video might not be your cup of nectar. If you are new to the game, I wouldn't recommend trying to absorb the entire rulebook in a single sitting. This isn't like learning to play Dixit. It will take time to gain familiarity with the rules, and as with all things in the Odyssey, it's as much about the journey as the destination. The good news is that although the game has many moving parts, you'll only be dealing with a subset of those rules, depending on which phase you're in. On top of that, the developers have put a lot of effort into making the game accessible. The Learn to Play booklet will guide you through the start of your adventure. The rulebook includes a very thorough 4-page index. New rules are introduced gradually after your Odyssey begins, and there are many components such as reference cards which will put the relevant rules at your fingertips. Given the breadth of gameplay mechanics, I think it's a good idea to start with a high-level overview of the different areas of gameplay, which is what I'm aiming for in this video. It will introduce some core concepts, help you to get oriented, and give you a taste of what's to come. I'll introduce the Argonauts at the heart of the Odyssey and the enormous ship they call home. We'll learn about the 3 fundamental phases of gameplay and the game components you'll use in each phase. And finally, we'll conclude with a brief introduction to combat. But be warned that this particular video will be light on details. It provides a good bird's eye view of the game, but will probably raise more questions than it answers. I should also mention that to keep things spoiler-free, I've created stand-ins for some of the game's cards and components. So some components you'll see here won't match what's in the physical game, but the rules themselves are from the finalized game. So let's get started. There are 3 campaigns or cycles in the core box. You can think of them as mostly separate, but they are narratively linked, so you always begin with Cycle 1, Truth of the Labyrinth. There is a small amount of overlap between the cycles, which means that you may sometimes be referred to one of the cycle books which you aren't currently playing. You'll win the game if you manage to reach one of the victory endings for your current cycle. The Argonauts are the player-controlled heroes of this Odyssey. There are always 4 Argonauts in play, regardless of the number of players, so solo players will need to manage 4 characters. It's possible for Argonauts to be killed or to retire, in which case they'll be immediately replaced by another. Each Argonaut has their own Triskelion and Argonaut sheet. The Argonauts begin the game with amnesia, but they'll gradually recover their memories as the game progresses. The main way this happens is through Nemos cards, named after Mnemosyne, the Greek goddess of forgetting where you left your car keys. Let's suppose Odyssey has just acquired this Nemos card entitled Hernia. On one side of the card is a little snippet of memory, and on the other side there are some helpful bonuses to unlock. I'll write the name of the Nemos card on my Argonaut sheet, and these checkboxes, called nodes, will track my progress through the sequence of memories. As you can see, there are some important points on this progress track called breakthroughs. Each breakthrough has an associated paragraph in the storybook, so I'll copy the paragraph number of the first breakthrough from my Nemos card onto the Nemos track. From now on, I'll be able to mark off those nodes based on certain game events. And when I mark off the breakthrough node, which happens during the story step if I've marked the preceding nodes, then I'll read the appropriate paragraph in the storybook. Triggering a breakthrough will unlock a better understanding of your character and their mysterious past. After unlocking the first breakthrough, I'll fill in the paragraph number of the next breakthrough node. So how do we mark off nodes on the progress track? Well, without wanting to go into too much detail, This list of traits, just below the card's title, will help you to know when you're allowed to mark off these numbered nodes on the progress track. And each breakthrough node will automatically be triggered during the story part of each round, providing all the nodes before it have been marked off. There are also several bonuses on the Nemos card, so don't forget about those. Perhaps the most valuable bonus is here at the bottom. As long as I'm in possession of this card, I get +1 courage and +1 will, so I'll update my Argonaut sheet right away. Above that, we have 3 abilities labelled level 1, 2 and 3. These abilities are gradually unlocked by marking nodes on the progress track. I have access to the level 1 ability right away because I'm on the first third of the progress track. When I reach the first breakthrough node, that will unlock the level 2 ability, and the next breakthrough node unlocks the last ability. Be warned that not all memories will be positive ones, and sooner or later you'll encounter the Nemos card's evil twin, the dreadful Fated Nemos card. These will bestow some sort of penalty. Just like ordinary Nemos cards, you'll mark their progress on a progress track, but fortunately they don't stick around for long. Unlike ordinary Nemos cards, they don't use paragraph numbers from the storybook. Instead, as soon as you reach the first breakthrough node, you'll resolve the card. That means flipping it over to the blue side, gaining the positive effect on the back by copying it to your Argonaut sheet, and finally discarding the card. Now that we've looked at both Nemos and Fated Nemos cards, I'll share the most important rule, which is this. Each Argonaut can only have a maximum of 2 cards of each type. In other words, an Argonaut can have up to 2 Nemos cards and up to 2 Fated Nemos cards. If you forget this rule, your copy of the game will be incinerated by Dionysus, the Greek god of board gaming. Most of your battles will be against primordials, which are so colossal you could put a viewing platform on top of their head and charge people admission. As if their sheer size weren't bad enough, they're also protected by a mystical force called Aeon Trespass, which is all but impenetrable. So if you're an ordinary mortal, which the Argonauts are, then picking a fight with a primordial is about as reckless as trying to pick spinach out of your teeth using a loaded crossbow. Which is where the Titans come in. The mighty Titans are enormous rampaging beasts, which the Argonauts are able to control and take into battle. Though not as gargantuan as the primordials, most Titans are at least 30 feet tall, and they're the only creatures powerful enough to break through a primordial's protective mantle and deal it some damage. In battle, each of the 4 Argonauts controls 1 Titan, so battles will typically pit 4 Titans against 1 primordial. To control a Titan, an Argonaut junctions with it, and in battle, the pair form a single cohesive unit. Each of the 4 Argonauts uses a triskelion to track their 3 most important stats, namely Rage, Fate and Danger, throughout the game. Values go from 0 to 9, with 0 being a sort of resting state and 9 being on the precipice of death or disaster. Outside of battle, these stats belong to the Argonaut, but within battle, the Argonaut and their Titan are so connected that these stats are effectively shared by them both. It's important to know that the position of these dials will carry over between the different phases of the game. For example, suppose Odyssey is unable to get the lid off a jar of pickles during a story event, and that causes his rage to increase. In that case, for better or for worse, Odyssey and his Titan are going to start the next battle with a shorter fuse and a meaner left hook. The main exception to this is at the very end of a battle when all 3 dials get reset to 0. Managing these 3 stats is quite the balancing act, because although low values are nice and safe, you'll need to raise the values in order to get things done. And higher stat values can trigger various effects, both positive and negative. But above all, if one of these dials goes over 9, you'll be killed.
Or worse, expelled.
The exact effect will depend on which attribute blew a gasket and whether you were in battle at the time, but it's always a catastrophe. So for the love of Aphrodite, don't let any of those dials exceed 9. Before moving on, let's take a closer look at each stat. As the name suggests, Rage represents the fury of your Titan when you're in battle. Every time your Titan performs an attack, the Rage dial goes up by 1, so you don't want battles to go on for too long. Higher values can make a Titan significantly more powerful though, Fate values increase when you resist your destiny. In some cases, you can choose to re-roll dice by raising your fate value. This is a pretty common technique, but just remember that not all dice rolls can be re-rolled in this way. For example, you can never re-roll 6-sided dice with this technique. The danger dial represents the rising threat of death. Here's just one example of an effect which only triggers when the danger dial is at 3 or more. As we've already seen, the Argonaut sheets track the status and progress of the 4 Argonauts. Similarly, the Argo sheet tracks the state of your city-sized ship, the Argo. But more than that, it tracks much of the game state and your progress through the current cycle. Let's look at a few highlights. Note that some parts of the sheet will only be used if you're saving the game, to pack it away. Just as each Argonaut has a fate stat on their Triskelion, the Argo itself also has a fate stat, which is tracked on the Argo sheet. Some dice checks can be re-rolled by raising the Argo fate, but be warned that if it goes over 9, you lose the campaign. Here are tracks for the integrity of the ship's hull and the strength and size of the crew. Unsurprisingly, if either of these drop to 0, you'll end up at the bottom of the ocean, or worse, and lose the campaign. In addition to the main story, each cycle has a number of subplots, or side quests, called hub adventures. You'll mark off each track from left to right as you progress through the entries in the storybook. As you voyage through Cycle 1, you'll encounter 3 factions: the Minoans, the Labyrinthians, and the Hornsworn. This is where you track your standing with each faction. Primordials are as tenacious as they are thick-skinned, which means that you'll battle each one repeatedly. They'll also level up and become stronger over the course of the campaign. At the top we track timeline battles, including the Primordials level. And below that we track the number of battles for both bosses and adversaries. The cargo hold is where you'll keep track of the various resources you've gathered, whether they're common mortal resources, rare primordial resources looted from the battlefield, or ultra-rare divine resources. Resources are used primarily to craft new gear. On the back of the Argo sheet we have the all-important timeline. This acts as a sort of calendar/appointment diary, with each line representing one day. As you can see, Cycle 1 must be completed in no more than 80 days. Near the start of each campaign round, you'll mark the next available checkbox. The various symbols and text will trigger events on specific days. And you'll also make your own entries here. For example, this technology card has a cooldown of 2 days, so if I've just used it, I'll make an entry on the timeline 2 days from now to remind me when it becomes available. Finally, there's a choice matrix, which records various decisions and events, a space to record the map state when saving the game, and a space for boons, afflictions and notes. Gameplay is divided into 3 phases. The voyage phase, which involves sailing your ship across the ocean, revealing new map tiles as you go, the adventure phase, which is centered on the storybook, and the battle phase, which uses the battleboard, miniatures and terrain tiles. The rulebook is divided into sections based on these 3 phases. In some board games, phases are strictly ordered, but in Aeon Trespass Odyssey, phases are not sequential, and it's possible for any phase to lead into any other. You can think of phases as a bit like modes of gameplay, each with their own set of rules. Phases make the game easier to manage because they enable you to focus on one set of rules at a time. No matter what you're doing, you'll always be in one of the 3 phases. As for the sequence of gameplay, that comes from campaign rounds, so let's take a look at those next. The campaign takes place over a series of rounds, with each round corresponding to 1 day. As we've already seen, days, or rounds, are tracked on the Argo sheet. Each round is divided into the following 9 steps. In Step 1, you'll move the Argo 1 tile on the voyage map. In Step 2, you'll mark off the next day on the timeline. Note that most symbols and entries for the current day won't have an immediate effect, but will be used later in the round. In steps 3 and 4, you'll be exploring and adventuring in your current location. This is mainly done by resolving the various symbols on your map tile. For example, this progress symbol grants me 1 progress token to place on the story card. Sadly, map symbols which are beneficial, like that one, only trigger the very first time you visit a location. If I return to this map tile in a later round, that symbol will be ignored. In contrast, symbols with a negative effect, such as the doom symbol, will stab you in the back every single time you visit that location. There are many other game effects which can occur during these 2 steps in the round. Some we've touched on already, such as the Nemos tracks, and others will be new, such as drawing cards from the exploration deck. In step 5, you'll check the timeline, and if it includes the timeline battle symbol, or any other battle events, then you'll venture onto the battlefield. We'll take a closer look at combat in a moment. Step 6 provides an opportunity for advancement by crafting new gear, developing new technologies, and so on. Step 7 is an opportunity for story events. These can be triggered by entries in the timeline, reaching new Nemos breakthroughs, or progressing a story card. Step 8 triggers any Doom events on the timeline or Doom card. And Step 9 triggers any end of round effects. And that's 1 game round in a nutshell. As you can imagine, there's a lot of variability in terms of which events get triggered and how much takes place. Before wrapping up this video, let's take a quick look at combat, which is one of the core pillars of gameplay. Battles take place on the battle board, which you'll set up according to instructions in the storybook. The aim of battle is to defeat the primordial, usually by inflicting 10 or so wounds. Movement is always measured in 4 cardinal directions, never diagonally. And the same goes for range and facing direction. Figures usually can't pass through one another. Ranged attacks usually require line of sight. Battles play out over a series of rounds, alternating between the primordial, who gets to act first, followed by the titans. Each primordial is controlled by its own unique AI deck. AI cards have instructions for targeting, moving, attacking, and so on. At the start of battle, the AI deck will consist of level 1 cards, but as the battle progresses, level 2 and 3 cards will be shuffled into the deck, making the primordial increasingly dangerous. When the primordial attacks one of the titans, it doesn't roll dice for the attack, but the titan they're attacking gets a chance to dodge by making an evasion roll. Evasion rolls use 1 or more 10-sided dice. Unlike other board games, Aeon Trespass Odyssey doesn't use hit points or health. So when the primordial manages to land a blow on your titan, this usually results in raising the danger stat on your Triskelion and drawing a trauma card. You might also find yourself getting knocked back into an obstacle or another titan, or knocked down, or any one of a dozen other harrowing ways primordials can grind your titan into the dirt. With the primordial round complete, it's time to pick yourself up and begin the titan round. Each titan gets 1 turn, and players can choose the order of activation. Each turn consists of up to 1 movement action and 1 combat action, typically an attack. Titan attacks are more complicated than primordial attacks. As mentioned earlier, titans must increase their rage by 1 near the start of their attack. In order to deal any damage to the primordial, you'll have to clear 2 separate hurdles. First an attack roll and then a power roll. If either one of those fails, then the primordial will walk away unscathed and may even end up hurting your titan. Let's take a closer look at each of these rolls. The attack roll uses 10-sided dice, and it determines the accuracy of your attack. Does the attack miss altogether? Or perhaps it only partially lands? Or perhaps it lands really accurately? Fortunately, you can mitigate a bad roll using the fate dial on your Triskelion. Raising your fate by 1 allows you to re-roll 1 die, just once. Assuming your attack roll didn't miss altogether, then you've landed a blow. You'll draw a card from the body part deck to find out which part of the primordial you just struck. Unfortunately, landing a blow does not guarantee that you've done any damage. You'll also need to make a power roll, which uses 6-sided dice. The outcome of your power roll is described on the body part card. Hopefully you'll manage to deal some damage, but just like a bouncer at a nightclub, most primordials don't take kindly to being punched in the face, so whether or not your blow does any damage, there's a good chance the primordial will immediately retaliate. This is called a primordial response, and it's described on the body part card. If you do manage to deal some damage, then the body part card becomes a wound card and gets placed on the wound stack. And if the stack reaches a certain size, the primordial is defeated. When a Titan lands a blow, they can often place one or more tokens, called Kratos tokens, in the Kratos pool. These tokens can be used by the next Titan to make their attack even more effective. As the rage of your Titan increases, so will your ability to place Kratos tokens. This is just one of the ways in which battles escalate over time. Both Titans and Primordials become more powerful and more dangerous the closer they are to death, and the developers refer to this crescendo as the inverted combat paradigm. So that was a whirlwind tour of the battlefield. To say that I glossed over a few details would be an understatement as gigantic as a Titan on a stepladder. All these dice rolls are modified and mitigated by many different factors. For more detailed combat rules, I highly recommend the video by 5 of Clubs, which is linked below. It's clear, informative, entertaining, and delves deep into battle with gameplay examples. Just be warned that although the fundamental combat rules haven't changed, some of the game components have been redesigned since that video was made. For example, the Kratos tokens used to look like this, but they ended up like this. Hopefully this video has provided a helpful overview of some of the game's core mechanisms, so that as you voyage into the unknown, not everything will be new and unfamiliar. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your own Odyssey.